David, money matters, right? So compensation committees and yes, some have changed and broadened the remit to talent development or things of that nature. But tell us what's going on in the compensation committee and what's going to be unique in 2026.
Thank you, Dennis. Yes, so volatility, of course, has a lot of implications for compensation program management. I'd say one of the biggest things, and a lot of companies have gotten to the point this year where you've set goals in your incentive plan, so there's not as much to change at this point. But as you think about the volatility, earlier this year there was still uncertainty about whether tariffs were going to be deemed legal, illegal, to whom they were going to apply. There's still uncertainty going forward. As companies think about the impact of that volatility, I think keeping compensation committees up at night is how effective are our plans in light of that volatility in motivating the right behaviors, retaining the right people, and general concern about how well our programs are functioning. Some of the things that we see companies do in the context of that volatility is to build in wider ranges in incentive plans for some of their goals, to get more comfortable with the exercise of discretion, qualitative judgment, perhaps building more judgment into their incentive programs. And I think critically making sure that you're following a consistent process throughout the year in checking in on how the incentive plan is doing so that you're prepared as changes in the market, changes to your business that were unexpected impact some of those outcomes, that you start to think about where, how, if you might want to try to address those and how you might explain it when you have to disclose those decisions in the following year. I think one of the components of the incentive program that we saw a lot of activity around heading into this year as a result of volatility was on the long-term incentive program. So a lot of committees taking a closer look at where unvested equity is, how much holding power do you have over your executives, how have some of our recent performance-based long-term incentive periods played out, where are our current programs tracking, so that you can try to get out ahead of where there may be potential issues on the horizon, and see if there are ways that you need to adjust the design of your program going into the next cycle. Travis mentioned some of the pressure that's being put on the proxy advisory firms. Of course, they play a significant role, have played a significant role in say on pay and in influencing program design. And with the backdrop of their sort of changing perspectives and maybe changing amount of influence, that's been a big topic of conversation in committees over the last couple of quarters. I would say their influence has been declining over the last several years, slowly. We've started to see negative recommendations from an ISS, for example, have less and less likelihood of driving a failed vote outcome. So in a certain sense, all of this pressure on the advisory firms and the way that they're trying to change their approach doesn't mean that we're really in a new world today. It's a reminder to boards, I think, and to our compensation committee clients to make sure that you understand what your individual investors are thinking. JP Morgan completely dropped the proxy advisory firms recently and are going to be moving on to some kind of an AI model to start to evaluate pay. So I think it's still important in that environment you have to continue the outreach that companies have been doing over the last few cycles and understand that ISS and Glass Lewis still will play a role. It just may be a different role going forward or not as influential. And for the purposes of incentive plan design, one of the potential changes we may see going forward as a result of changing advisory firm perspectives is maybe more comfort with more time-based equity. So if you think about the advisory firms really pushed performance-based equity. And we're very successful about increasing the prevalence of those types of awards in U.S. executive pay, and have recently signaled more comfort with long vested time-based awards, coinciding with compensation committees being more concerned about retaining people through volatile cycles. So I think we may see more comfort with increasing the weight on time-based equity awards as we move forward. Those are some of the biggest things on the radar for compensation committees. There's, of course, the potential for significant changes in pay disclosures going into 2027. The SEC did indicate that they were going to broaden their review of what they might rethink. So there may be some real material changes, but currently we're still operating with the existing pay disclosures, and compensation committees are spending a lot of time from an incentive plan standpoint in reviewing the language in the proxy to make sure that companies are explaining not only the outcomes, but the rationale for the way that you're setting goals in a volatile environment. I do a lot of my work in oil and gas. Not every year is up. And so trying to explain in the proxy why this year might be down relative to last year and all of the considerations that go into the goal setting, we're seeing more, and you will see more of that in this year's proxies, describing in very plain English, here's why these goals may be different from year to year.
Great, thanks, David. Most people think 2026 is going to be a major year for M&A. M&A makes peer group selection trickier as the population continues to shrink. Could you talk a little bit about what boards or compensation committees, more specifically, how should they think about peer groups and the strains that M&A may be putting on the selection of those companies?
Thank you, Dennis. Peer group composition has been a big topic of conversation from two perspectives. Of course, compensation committees use peer groups to benchmark the design and the pay levels in their program, and then also to benchmark relative performance. So I think it's caused a lot of compensation committees to go back as you have a narrower group of companies that you can consider to be direct competitors, either for business or for talent, to get a little bit more comfortable with expanding the universe of what they consider to be the competitive market. So from a benchmarking perspective, you may see companies, for example, in one sector of oil and gas, one sector of a particular industry, starting to expand the definition of what might be peers to other sectors of their industry or other analogous industries with people who are doing some of the same kinds of things or have similar backgrounds in order to get a big enough data set. And sometimes potentially pulling in a separate general market peer group in order to provide a broader fairway. And then getting the compensation committee more comfortable with the idea that there isn't a percentile or a number that's an answer. There's not going to be a perfect peer group. And so having the comfort to vary individual pay levels within a fairway that you believe is credible. From a performance management perspective, it's similarly getting comfortable with how maybe defining more broadly who your competitors are, and also ensuring that you have the right mechanism in place when somebody drops out of a peer group, somebody's acquired, goes bankrupt, various other scenarios, and talking about what that might look like ahead of time. So that goes back to monitoring how your incentive plans are doing and sticking to a process and kind of alerting the compensation committee early about what might be on the horizon.